the room you are in is called the model room, and we are 168 feet below the surface. But again, as deep as we are, still not our lowest point within the cave, 209 feet. So we have a little more than 40 feet left to go before we hit that final depth here within the cave. Now, we were talking a little bit ago about that cultural history of the cave. Again, we got to see some of those signatures, including one very important signature that belongs to one very important young man. But it's important to know that long before Alvin ever steps foot into this cave, long before he's even born, the local Native Americans are going to live and worship this cave because, again, they hold it to be so incredibly sacred. And we have evidence of those local Native Americans living right here on the property that dates back to more than 4,000 years ago, including ancient teepee rings as well as an ancient bison jump here on the property. Wow. Now, those local Native Americans, because they do hold the cave to be sacred, they're going to help protect and preserve this cave up until August of 1874, when everything's going to change because of a man that some of you may be familiar with by the name of Custer. Now, Custer's going to lead an expedition down here to the Black Hills in August of 1874 out of Fort Abraham Lincoln up in North Dakota. Now, his official purpose down here, it's easier to find out whether the rumors of gold that exist here in the Black Hills are true or not. And sure enough, August of 1874, he's going to find a placer deposit of gold right along French Creek, about 30 minutes north of here. And that's going to change everything, because at this point in American history, the United States is in desperate need of gold. It changed over from the silver standard to the gold standard. And the prior year, in 1873, they had a pretty major financial panic that's going to be the worst financial crisis the country has seen until 60 years later with the Great Depression. So they need a whole bunch of gold, and they need it now. There's quite a bit of gold in the Black Hills. In fact, around 10% of the world's gold supply is dug up right here in the Black Hills. So, despite signing two different treaties with the local Native Americans, the 1851 and 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty, both of which guarantee the Black Hills to those local tribal nations, the government is going to round them up and forcibly remove them to the reservations here within the state of South Dakota. With the removal of the Native Americans, they're also removing the knowledge of the cave itself. Until 1881, where two brothers were moving into this area to take advantage of the fact that the Native Americans have been removed from this area. They're going to camp right up where you folks actually park today. They're headed down to Hot Springs. And when they set up camp for the night, they get hungry, and they're going to chase after a deer. And that chase is going to lead them down into a gulch, right past a bush that seems to be moving, even stranger than that, breathing. And behind that bush, they're going to go ahead and take a look. And they're going to see that natural entrance open that you folks got to see a short while ago. Now, they continue down to Hot Springs. They're going to tell their friends, who are going to tell their friends, who are going to tell their friends and tell their friends, until soon, rumors are growing all throughout the Black Hills about a hole that seems to be breathing just like it's alive. And the South Dakota Mining Company is going to hear those rumors, and in 1890, they're going to purchase the mining rights to the cave and hire a manager for the cave by the name of Jesse McDonald, who moves here and brings with him his 16-year-old son, Alvin McDonald. Now, when they come down into the cave, squeezing right through that hole that we saw, they're going to realize almost immediately the cave is limestone. And if you're looking for precious minerals, things like gold, limestone is not the rock you want to find. It's actually quartz. So they have to start thinking, well, we can't mine down here. How else can we make money? And their solution is a simple one, but effective. The deeper they go into the cave, the more beautiful it becomes. And they start to think, you know what? We could probably charge people money to see the beauty of this cave. Crazy idea, right? Who would pay money to see Wind Cave? Nobody here, right? Now, in 1890, they're going to make the cave more accessible. And by more accessible, I mean not really. The biggest thing they're going to do that you folks actually benefit from today is they're going to go a few feet to the left of that natural entrance opening, and they're going to blast open a new hole right down into the cave system with dynamite. And that is the entryway that you folks actually walked in through today. But once they get into the cave, though, it's really not that much more accessible. If you can imagine that time where there's no steps, no pathways, and no lights, can get pretty difficult, right? But luckily for you folks, you don't have to imagine it. We're going to go ahead and experience it. So, we're going to go ahead and turn out the lights. Oh, fun here. If you are afraid of the dark, please hold the hand of the person next to you, but not a stranger's hand. That is incredibly important. Please make sure you do remain standing exactly where you are. Do not move from those spots. If you have things like watches, smart devices, anything like that, please make sure they are tucked away and hidden so we can experience the true darkness that is. Donald greeting them, it's going to be that middle son, Alvin. And Alvin is going to open up that door, hand them an unlit candle, and tell them to go down into the cave. Now imagine that you're part of that group. You'd look at Alvin and you would say, that's crazy. Are we going to light the candle? And Alvin's going to tell you, no. The cave is breathing. And we're not going to waste the money or resources relighting your candle every couple seconds. So instead, Alvin is going to point down to your feet where you're going to see for the first time a thin line of twine tied to a rock that slowly unravels down into the darkness. And he's going to tell you, get down on your hands and knees and follow that line of twine. And you're going to start to crawl forward down into the darkness where all light has disappeared. And it's going to lead you to what feels like a pretty thick piece of rope. And Alvin's going to tell you, rappel down the rope. And you're going to rappel down about 50 feet of rope, at the end of which, feeling around for that line of twine, you'll find it and you're going to follow it. It's going to lead you to a ladder. And Alvin's going to tell you, descend down the ladder. And you're going to go down a 40-foot ladder. At the end of which, again, feeling around on your hands and knees for a line of twine, you're going to find it and follow it. It's going to lead you to a second ladder. This one is only about 30 feet. And at the end of it, back down you go again on your hands and knees, crawling around, finding that line of twine. This time, you're going to crawl for nearly 1/10 of a mile.
Wow.
And you can't see the cave around you, but you know you're crawling through some tight spaces because as you're crawling along on your stomach, you can feel the formations and ceiling pressing into your back. And again, that's what your tour is going to be like for the first hour until you hit the post office, the first room that we stopped in today. And then finally, they're going to be able to light their candle, and as you can see, the single flame is actually pretty bright within this space. And if we had a few more of these lights down here, this room would glow right in front of us. Now, candles are going to be the primary source of light down here within the cave for the next 10 years. And the reason why they don't utilize better sources of lighting within the cave is because the candle is not only a really cheap and accessible tool for lighting, it's also incredibly useful for exploration. Alvin, despite having no formal training and no formal education, is able to figure out that the candle flickers and extinguishes as they move along the main passageway deeper into the cave. And he starts to think, well, if the candle flickers and extinguishes the deeper we go down into the cave, if we hold this candle up to unexplored passages, and that candle flickers, it means that that passageway takes you deeper into the cave. If they hold that candle up to passages, and it doesn't flicker, he knows that it is a dead end. And that's going to help direct his exploration efforts here within the cave. So in the span of 3 years, he is able to explore nearly 10 miles of passageway here within the cave. Now, after about 10 years, though, the biggest change is going to actually come from all the visitors down on the tour. Because, as you can imagine, if you're paying to take a 5-hour tour within the cave, you probably want to see the cave around you, right? So their solution is simple again. Take the candle and place it in a little tin bucket, because now that candle is protected from the wind flow in and out of the cave, but also the light is now able to be directed where you want it to go. Basically, an early flashlight. And they start to get a more accurate view of the cave system itself. And if you want to know what the floors are going to look like that they're walking across, all of the space on this opposite side that I'm currently illuminating, this is natural. This is what those early tour groups would have had to walk over and crawl over as they would have been following first the line of twine and then eventually the candle and then the candle bucket. But for us today, as you can see, every so often there's some lights that are illuminated. So who first installs the lights? Well, a few lights are going to be put in 1931. The National Park Service installs them right up near the entrance area, but The first systematic lighting and the steps and the pathways, they're all going to be installed by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s. And the work they do down here is incredible. It's also not going to be easy by any means, because in order to make every individual step that you folks walked on today, they're going to go ahead and take a rubber tire and cut it in half, which makes 2 long rubber hoses. They're going to take one of those hoses, cinch one side closed, fill it with 40 to 50 pounds of concrete, cinch that other side closed, throw it over their shoulders, and just like the earliest explorers down here, they're going to descend down rope, ladders, crawl on their hands and knees, dragging that 40 to 50 pounds of concrete behind them. And it's going to take 4 to 5 hoses to make every individual step that you folks walked on today. Now on our tour, we have right around 300 steps, but throughout the cave, we have more than 1,000. And they're going to start not at the surface, utilizing their own steps that they're pouring as they descend deeper, but instead, they're starting at the lowest points, working their way back up. And as they go between sections of steps, they're going to help level out the floor. And they're going to repeat that process. Steps, excavation of pathways, steps, excavation of pathways, until they get all the way back up to that entrance opening. So people wonder, how much is natural versus how much has really been carved out? And the answer is really kind of from about your waist down. There's been quite a bit of work done, but really the ceiling and the walls have been left relatively untouched, because we're actually following ancient fissure lines that were created again when that limestone was being ripped open. You got to see a little bit of that when we were walking through some of those spaces where the walls only wide about 2 meters or so, but they ascend straight up about 70, 80 feet above you. And so that's going to help in a way those early groups down there, because they don't have to really guess where they're walking. They're just essentially following natural fault lines all throughout the cave system. But the work that the Civilian Conservation Corps down here doesn't just extend to the steps and to the pathways. They also build an incredible device called an elevator. And that's where we're going to be headed to next, is to the assembly room right outside where that elevator is located.